I'm not sure if Excalibur was this Excalibur was a Marvel series, but it almost felt like it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Spoiler Room. Appreciate you joining us as we have Roundtable Month here on the Spoiler Room, where we're looking at different films that cover the story of King Arthur and the Round Table. And I tried to pick some different ones that still dealt with the similar story to see, the different interpretations. We had Camelot from the 60s. We had Monty Python and the Holy Grail from the 70s. And now we've hit 1981, just before Conan hit, a star-filled version of the telling of King Arthur was done. And we're looking at tonight Excalibur from 1981, directed by John Borman. And I have my wonderful right-hand man with me tonight. He keeps coming back for more. And he questions my picks sometimes, I know. But it is none other than Mr. Ian Simmons. How you doing, Ian?
I'm doing great because we're almost through it this month. These movies are very interesting, but damn it, you chose the theme with the longest movies, I swear.
I didn't intend to till after I picked them, and then as I'm putting them one together, I'm looking at the runtime. I'm like, oh shit. And then I looked at this one. I'm like, okay, Excalibur 81, right? An 81 movie about Earth. Shit. Okay, so
2 hours and 20 minutes.
2 hours, and I'm like, okay, yeah, let's do this.
But I will say, I'm glad that we watched these in the order that we did, because this is everything that Camelot should have been. And we had a nice little break with Holy Grail last week. So yeah, we're right back on track.
Yeah, and we could give a quick synopsis. It's the story of King Arthur. It's literally similar to the exact story we got in Camelot. Arthur, he comes up and he becomes, pulls the sword from the stone. Though we get to see that. We actually get a little bit of a prequel story here versus what we got in Camelot. We get to see how Arthur came, how his birth, and how he came to be the king, before we dive into the whole, the whole triangle, the love triangle aspect of the story, which it boils down to at some point. But so Excalibur, telling of Arthur, you mentioned it already, Ian. What'd you think of this telling of this story?
Well, I'm kicking myself because, my schedule is what it is, so I don't think I would have been able to make it anyway. But one of our local movie palaces last Wednesday had this on their mega screen.
Oh, really?
It was a one night only event, and I couldn't go. But now, having watched it on my laptop, I'm wishing that I had been able to get out there, because I think it's hard to evaluate this movie, I think, because we've been talking about these kinds of movies. So it's like, here's these beats again. Oh, we're this part of the story. So, I've got I don't know, an hour plus left to go in terms of narrative. But just taken on its own, I think this movie's pretty incredible. And it's amazing to me that it told more of the King Arthur story in all directions, from, like you mentioned, a prologue all the way up to sort of an epilogue, as far as where the characters ended up. And it's still an hour shorter than Camelot. Which skipped the entire, we caught up with King Arthur as a man. He already had the sword and everything. And we're like, stop with the singing and all. What was going on here? But this is like the perfect version of this story, I think. Very impressive.
It is impressive, because we open and you're like, King Arthur is at war with someone, and what I'm like, no, this is Pendragon. This is his dad we're talking about. We get to see how his dad wasn't exactly a great guy. He coveted his very loose allies. Not ally, but they had a truce, and he just had to have a woman. And he gets her pregnant, posing as her husband, thanks with the help of Merlin, who looks like he belongs in an early 80s metal band, but still, we get a lot more Merlin action in this one than we did in Camelot for sure. And he plays a pivotal role in this. And yeah, this is the story that you're familiar with that I like because there's some twists and turns. Merlin is kind of this, they actually play him as this gray area character to where he's kind of got his own agenda. He set up the whole thing just so that we could have Arthur, so he knew Arthur would eventually pull Excalibur from the stone. And it's like, wow, and yeah, it hits all those beats, but it does it in a really smooth way because even though we joked about it being 2 hours and 20 some minutes, I didn't really feel it for most of it.
Oh, I felt it, but that's just
Did you?
because, it's just the
Yeah.
way I have to watch movies is like chopped up into bits,
Sure.
running from one place to the next. But it felt like, and I think it's because it goes through so many eras. I mean, literally from before King Arthur's birth up until his death as a very old man, we see his entire life play out. I'm like, this could have been, as the cliche goes, a movie series or a mini series, right?
Mini series, yeah.
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 But it's exceptionally well done. It's funny, Nicol Williamson, who plays Merlin, he played Cagliostro, another kind of mysterious ancient wizard in Spawn in 1997.
Oh, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. He did. I forgot that. Yeah.
This movie had much better effects than Spawn 97 somehow. It came out 16 years earlier.
It had better effects, production design. Yeah, and the way the story plays out and everything is definitely more intriguing. And it's got familiar faces in it as well. I remember Helen Mirren being Morgana in here, the older Morgana, because we actually get introduced. You even get more Morgana in this. You literally get to be introduced to Arthur's half sister, Morgana, when she's a kid, because she's also there and she's got the magic, and they play the magic angle with her more. We get to explore with her more, but you get Helen Mirren in a interesting role as Morgana. But you also have in here Liam Neeson. It was like the knights started talking, and I looked at one of the knights going, wait, is that Liam Neeson? And then when he spoke again, I'm like, yep, that's Liam Neeson. And then Patrick Stewart's in here. He's, this must have been his I'm joining the Chosen One army, period of his life between now and then Dune later on.
Well, it's also, I kept calling to mind that scene from Back to the Future where Marty says, he sees his Principal Strickland in the hall and he says, Jesus, didn't that guy ever have hair? And I thought that about Patrick Stewart. I'm like,
yeah,
40 years ago.
You look at Patrick Stewart in this, he looks exactly like he did in Next Generation, and there's like 12 years between that, but yet it's like, wait, what? Liam Neeson too, actually, without the beard, he looked very similar too.
Well, it's crazy because this was, oh my gosh, when did Darkman come out? Darkman was 1990s. This is 9 years before that.
Mm-hmm.
And he looks much older in this movie than he did in Darkman. Darkman looks like he's straight out of college. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, but you got that. And who I was really surprised with seeing here was a young Kieran Hines, who would go on to play Caesar in Rome, a great HBO series, by the way. Oh my God, I love Rome. But yeah, so there's some familiar faces in this early Excalibur tale, and I'm like, wow, I didn't realize there were this many people, that were recognizable in it.
Oh yeah, I mean, you mentioned Helen Mirren. This was because she had done Caligula, I think, 2 years early, and that was another like incest drama. Wow. I'm surprised. I'm amazed she had a career after that. It's a testament to her acting. But also, Gabriel Byrne played Uther, who was the Uther Pendragon. He of Usual Suspects fame, and that's the thing. I was not expecting this movie, this whole like prologue about Arthur's heritage and his father, and just Igraine is the name of the woman that he was lusting after. And
Yes.
she was cool and everything, but like giving up your entire kingdom for 30 seconds in heaven, as it turned out to be, or 30 seconds in
She
hell. That
she knew
scene.
she yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that scene where he's, doing the deed, it's, lovely thematic. You could say it's like really on the nose, but like the fireplace behind them is like a huge conflagration. It looks like they're having sex in hell because they're essentially damning their future generations and all of the kingdoms to, despair. And
Mhm.
especially in the later part of the movie, it gets really strange during the crusade for the Grail that goes on for 10 years, and it turns into this like trippy horror movie with the appearance of our old friend Mordred from Camelot, who here is like the little creepy child. There's so much awesome weird stuff going on in this movie that it changes genres about 5 times, and I loved it.
It does. This film, it starts out, it just takes some weird choices in here. They lean into the I was very happy to see them lean into the Marvel the Merlin stuff, you know. The magic, getting to see more of the magic angle with it, with Merlin. The backstabbing going on, the tension, the way they set it up here for um how Arthur is in denial to the public, but privately he knows Guinevere and Lancelot are wanting each other. I think is done so much better here than in Camelot, because it's just, they have this scene where he's like, yeah, no, someone speaks out saying that, yeah, Guinevere and Lancelot got the hots for each other, and then there's a battle between Lancelot and the knight, which we get the
And
joust.
Liam Neeson, yeah.
Yeah, with Liam Neeson, with the battle, and we don't get a Lancelot heals him like in Camelot. We don't get this type of angle. He's just a better warrior in the end. And so then they're like, okay, nope. I just yeah, no, she's innocent. And what I love is, at this part of the story versus the original the Camelot we watched in 67, which we'll be doing some comparisons tonight because the stories are so similar, is that Arthur already had his establishment of law in this version by the time someone challenged the virtue of Guinevere, so to speak. And
Yeah.
I liked that. I thought that played better. That made more sense.
It did. And, there's a lot going on in this movie, but they don't juggle like the creation of the concept of the rule of law. Like that's
Yeah. Yeah.
that doesn't belong in this genre, really. I appreciate Camelot trying to tie it all together historically, but this is a sexy, violent action adventure story. This isn't Star Wars Episode 1, which also featured Liam Neeson.
Although I did put in my notes, it does borrow heavily from Star Wars in their approach.
Oh yeah. Oh, dude, you've got Lancelot, jumping ahead. He comes back for his Han Solo moment during the big battle with Mordred. Yeah.
Well, not only that, but you get, you get Merlin in here. You get, the sword. You get, the Merlin talks about the dragon. And he literally goes, the dragon is all around us. It's in the trees. It's in the right. And I'm like, oh my God. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, this movie came out the year after Empire Strikes Back, and I don't know when it started production, but you have that whole scene where Lancelot is fighting himself in the woods, the giant armored version of himself. It's just like Luke on Dagobah. Like, what is going on here?
He fights his own self, and he injures himself severely by running himself through with a sword on the side. Yeah, you've got the whole dragon idea of the Force, basically. There's so many beats in here. You're just like, okay, so the story came first, so Star Wars portrayed that better on screen. Before then, you didn't really have a good example, but now you have this one doing that same It's like, oh my lord, a lot of familiar. But when he went into the speech about the dragon being all around, I'm like, all right, this is a little too on the nose for me.
Yeah, I'm there with you. Well, speaking of the dragon, I mean, there's we never really see it. We see the mist of the dragon, and we
Yeah.
see what's supposed to be, I don't know, I'm not sure if it's its lair or this like kind of underground like
Mhm,
magic place that they go to, but it looks really cool. And I did love the kind of the tints of green lighting that would show up
mhm,
throughout the movie, particularly anytime you see it reflected off the blade of Excalibur. Like, where is that light coming from? It's just adds an otherworldly quality to it. I'm sure it's just some grip off to the side, like shining a light onto the sword or something. But it really, it sold the illusion to me.
Well, I mean, it's a very budget effective way to make the title character, basically Excalibur, make it feel like it's a character, and that it was different than the swords. Because you're right, it's lighted different. You've got the green angle, the light to it, kind of tint to it whenever you see it. And it's an impressive sword, but it's not over elaborate either. They play more with the angle of the Lady of the Lake and the meaning of Excalibur, which I loved in this one. For instance, Arthur goes after Lancelot, and unlike the previous example we saw in the 67, in this one, uh instead of the Black Knight in Monty Python not letting anybody over the bridge, in this one Lancelot's fighting anybody who tries to come over the bridge on the King's Road. And here we have Arthur fighting him, and Arthur gets very frustrated at him, and he uses Excalibur to basically go at Lancelot with not pure intentions that a knight should have, and Excalibur breaks. And Arthur's like, well, oh shit, because he hit the armor of Lancelot, who's a pure knight at this point yet, before he hasn't met Guinevere yet and taken that road. So he's still, the chaste. And Arthur is dark. He's in his darker armor. He's been through war. He's been through some hell trying to unite his kingdom. And when he hits Lancelot finally in rage, in anger, I love this, how Excalibur breaks, and he's like, what the hell? And then Merlin's like, yeah, go throw it back in the pond. You broke it. And so he's like, well, crap. So he threw it back in the pond, and then Arthur has his moment of reality of what happened, why, and he feels sorry. And suddenly the Lady of the League comes back going, okay, here's chance number 2. Here's your sword back. And I love how the Lady of the Lake played into that as well.
I did,
Mhm.
except I don't know if this
Yeah.
happened to you, but I could not get the promo for Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 out of my head.
Yes. No,
That's all I saw, was waiting for that chainsaw to come up out of the lake and get thrown to Leatherface.
well, I mean, because that shot that's in this film is the one that they mimicked in the Chainsaw Massacre 3 teaser trailer. Is that exact one of the hand and clad in shimmering samite, uh and this moistened binked, no, she lost, the chainsaw, the trailer, and here she lost Excalibur twice. Arthur gets it, and I loved that angle. I loved how this really leaned more into not only the magic but the fantasy elements of the story that many might be more used to, as well as the Christian angle, because they bring it up far more in this. In fact, it's a whole arc they do with Merlin and Morgana, who shows up later. This is before she seduces her brother Arthur to have a kid. Yes. Yes, they go there. Hey, it's rated R, folks.
No, Mark, it's not.
Oh, this
This is a
wasn't rated.
this is a PG rated movie. I just looked
Was
it up on
this
IMDb.
really? Was this
Yes,
really rated PG?
and it's got boobies and
There's
uh
extensive sex and boobies and blood and
and like just the scene alone where Mordred dies, he gets run through and just like this fountain of blood gurgles up from his mouth. I'm like, yeah, bring the kids.
oh shit, it is PG. Wow.
I
How
love
did
the 80s. I love the
I
1980s.
love the 80s. Of course, should surprise me. You had duck breasts, and that was PG in Howard the Duck. So, but yeah, but this has a full on like sex scene, a couple of them,
Couple. Yeah.
among other brutal acts of violence, and it's only PG.
Oh
Okay,
yeah, the scene
sure.
where the crow or whatever is eating the eyeball out of the
The
knight's skull
skull
on the
of one of the
tree.
knights. Yeah, yeah.
That
Because
freaked me out, and I'm 47 years old.
it did, yeah. Because you do get the entire life of Arthur, and I loved that in here, how it covered so much ground. Because you get Arthur, he knows that Lancelot and Guinevere are lusting after each other, uh, and he tracks them down, Lancelot and Guinevere, in the woods, and there's kind of this dream sequence, and then Lancelot wakes up with Guinevere. They're naked in the woods. They just got it on, and there's Excalibur between them, and they do this whole thing of no sword, no king, because it's the whole Excalibur, unites the kingdom by declaring the one true king, which is Arthur, and he gives up the sword. And suddenly we see how that kind of gives us the old riders of Rohan angle with the Lord, because Arthur suddenly starts to dwindle in health after giving up his sword instead of killing Lancelot and Guinevere, letting them go about their business. And they don't cover it too much, but Guinevere still goes to the nuns, and Lancelot becomes this like preacher in the woods.
Yeah, it's really wild, and that bit where you see King Arthur standing over the two sleeping figures in the woods, and he lifts up the sword he's kind of like struggling with, and he plunges it down. And right as he does that, Merlin gets stabbed in the back in the
Yes.
kind of the crystal realm or whatever, um, and that leads to all sorts of problems, like with Morgana, and she ends up trapping him there after stealing his like the knowledge of his power. And then she goes and casts that same spell that was used on her mother by Uther at the beginning, which was given to him by Merlin to have that clandestine act. You mentioned, Arthur impregnates his own half sister with a baby who ends up being Mordred. Flash forward 10 years, there's the quest for the Grail, in order to, I guess, restore Arthur to his full health.
Right.
Wait,
Yeah.
why couldn't he just go get the sword again? Is it because he
Because
relinquished it?
he relinquished they don't explain it, but my understanding with it is that he relinquished it. He gave it up, basically. He gave up Excalibur, and by doing so, that affected his health. And I don't think he ever went back looking for it. Lancelot, we know, held on to it later on. We find out that he held on to it, but he never went back for it because he didn't want to go back and face Guinevere and Lancelot. And by sticking it there, you get the impression Lancelot kept the sword, but felt awkward trying to confront Arthur on it, because obviously Arthur caught them, and Guinevere went on to be a nun. So, that's the impression I get, is that Arthur didn't seek the sword, and Lancelot couldn't bring himself to bring the sword back to Arthur, regardless of his devotion to the country, because of the sinful act he did with laying with Guinevere. So I think that kept him from that. But
I guess I'm just trying to figure out, because like initially the sword was plunged into the rock, and then young Arthur came and he was worthy to take it out.
right,
So when Arthur gives up the sword by plunging it into another
the
rock or
ground,
some
well, yeah,
ground or whatever, um, how is it that so he relinquishes the sword, and thus there's no king, and so the kingdom falls into darkness. So how was Lancelot slash Guinevere able to pick it up and wrap it in those
well,
cloths and keep it in the monastery for 15 years?
because I think, if we remember correctly, the Excalibur was put in the sword due to a spell by Merlin. He put it in the sword. He's put the sword in a stone, but when Arthur stabs the ground, he ends up stabbing Merlin because Merlin had his
Yeah.
power taken away by Morgana at that same time.
Oh, that's right.
So I think that broke the spell. So Excalibur was no longer, until it gets returned to the Lady of the Lake, it's no longer has any power because of the sin amongst all three of our main characters, Guinevere, Lancelot, and Arthur. That sin ended up taking away the power of Excalibur and hurting Merlin, because Merlin gave up his power, or shared his power with Morgana, who used it against him.
Yeah.
So
okay. Yeah.
That's not all laid out in exposition. I'm just piecing that together with.
Well, no, I think it makes sense. It's just there's a lot going on. And again, I didn't. Yeah. I was watching this thing in pieces, so it was kind of hard to remember how it all fit together. But no, your explanation makes sense to me.
Yeah, and it leans into that story of sin and how that ends up being the downfall of Arthur and these three characters altogether, and the kingdom. Because once Arthur once this happens and things come to a head with this whole relationship angle with Lancelot and Guinevere and Arthur and all that, that affects the whole kingdom. So yeah, the 10 years, the kingdom is, oh, there's some lovely filth down here. Literally, they're wallowing in filth. There's famine, there's pestilence, there's the plagues, basically, almost. Arthur is declining in health but can't die. They don't, like, again, to a lot of explanation, but you get the feeling he's cursed now, to where he's dwindling in health, but he's forced to watch the land wither because he used his rage out against Lancelot and Guinevere and gave up Excalibur, basically just left it in the woods when he should have taken it back with him. And that's just like 15 minutes of this whole movie.
Yeah. And one thing we're not really giving the movie credit for is that it's funny, and not unintentionally funny, but I mean, Merlin's a character.
Merlin's hilarious.
Like early on, I think it was when Arthur first sees Guinevere or something like that. He's like, do you have a spell that I can use to make her fall in love with me? And he's like, no, I tried one of those once. And without mentioning that it was with his dad, he's like, never again. He just turns and walks away. He's a daffy dude. I like it. Yeah.
Well, that's what I liked. I liked that they played him up like that, because that is how I always imagined Merlin to be, because he is always this kind of gray area character that, he's with Arthur, and his intentions are good, but he's also got his own things going on. The Crystal Cave, because Morgana is older, because we jump around in time, jump ahead in time in chunks. Morgana is older, and Merlin meets up with her when Arthur, I think it's when Arthur and Guinevere get married. He meets up with her, and she's like older now, and she wants to learn the ways of the dragon, and be a dragon knight like her father. Never mind. Sorry. So eventually he takes her down to this, what we call the Crystal Cave. What's funny is I called it the Crystal Cave of porn, because when they're going down the steps of this cave with where the power it's alluded that this is where the origins of magic are. This is like the Dragon Cave, where where these crystals are, where magic comes from. As they're going down, there's all the images of various lovers together. As he's walking out, I'm like, oh, look at this peeping Tom. Look at that, that's just creepy. And then when he gives her the spell for changing, she traps him in the crystal. And I love that whole angle with Morgana too. I mean, it's creepy, sure. But at the same time, it was just interesting with her character, how she ends up having the kid with Arthur by seducing him. Go Helen Mirren. And then, just so that she could have an heir to the throne. And Arthur, the climactic battle between Arthur, who gets his mojo back, because yes, we do get the quest for the Grail here that took 10 years. And they suddenly, this character, because the film is longer, but as if you didn't have enough characters, we get Percival. We get the wonderful Percival, who started out as the squire to Lancelot. Lancelot doesn't show up to challenge Liam Neeson, basically. So Percival does, but he needs to be a knight. So Arthur just makes him a knight.
Right. And then right before he gets to take on Liam Neeson, Lancelot shows up. So he doesn't quite get his chance.
Right.
But he does eventually become a knight. And it's funny because his storyline kind of parallels Arthur's journey, because when we catch up with Arthur as I guess his late teens, early 20s or whatever, there's a time jump between when he's an infant and when we see him next. He's just kind of like this lowly kid who's supposed to be, he's helping his adoptive father like get the swords ready for his adoptive brother to go into a fight or into a match of some kind. He's like, oh, I lost the swords and I gotta go figure it out. And he kind of comes across the stone and with Excalibur in it. I loved how it was sort of a sideshow. Like there's people in games and stuff like, people are going to come from all around to try this sword out. So we're going to have it's like going to Comic-Con with the vendor tables, right? But I loved that when Arthur pulls the sword out, he just like, well, I might as well try it. I'm here. And he pulls out and just comes out like butter. He just kind of like whips it out of the stone. I had always kind of imagined there being some kind of a struggle, like he can lift it, but it's just like, it's still hard, but he can take it out. This is like takes it out and he's like, oh shit, and he puts it back in.
He puts it back in.
Yeah, it's like, no, do that again. And of course we saw Patrick Stewart and a couple of other people try and they just couldn't do it. They're grunting and straining. He's like, whoop, I did it again. But yeah, that Arthur's journey and then Percival's journey, that's like one of 16 subplots in this movie, but they really cared to tell these parallel stories and have them line up. It's Percival who goes on this quest for the Grail. He's the only one pretty much who survives.
Yeah.
He's the one who encounters Mordred and gets put through hell. He's like hanging from a tree in a dream sequence and the vision of the Grail and blood. I don't know what's going on in that whole sequence, but he ends up kind of helping to rescue Arthur at the end, and Arthur trusts him to go and return the sword to the lake, and he couldn't do it, so he comes back and Arthur's like, so tell me what happened when you put the sword in the water. He's like, nothing. And then Arthur just pretty much says, well, then I know you didn't put the sword in the water. Go back and do it for real this time.
Yeah, I loved that angle. I didn't think they'd do that to where Percival, go do it, Percival, and he couldn't, and he's coming back, and Arthur's like, you didn't do it. Go do it again. And they actually did that. I'm like, okay, this is different. I did not expect at the very dramatic ending of Arthur and everything that we'd have this kind of little comical moment of, well, no, I couldn't do it. And he's like, no, go do it again. God.
Well, it's cool because it's funny, but it's also kind of heartfelt because at first I thought he didn't put the sword in because he was like, oh, well, now I can take Excalibur. No one's going to know. But he's just like, no, I can't just throw this thing away. And Arthur's like, it belongs to the Lady of the Lake and someone's going to come along to, claim it again. And it'll come to them. It's destiny.
Well, that's what's interesting with them giving us Percival's story, because Percival, like you said, parallels Arthur to a point, but Percival ends up being if Arthur didn't stray from the path, basically, is what it is. Because Percival, he's the only one of the only surviving knights left. The other knights either have died in the cold or a lot of them were killed by Morgana. Because when he encounters Mordred, there's all the knights hanging from trees. He encounters Morgana. Morgana tries to turn him, but he's pure. And so, he goes into this kind of dream sequence, and they do this parallel thing where in real life, he's hanging from a rope and they're trying to hang him like the other knights. But in his vision, he's seeing the Grail, and he's having a vision of basically the Lord, an existential vision, actually, as he's dying, being hung. And he answers the question wrongly at first of who he is and what does the Grail mean. And then he has another vision later on and he answers correctly. And that's when he gets the Grail. And because he gets dumped into the water, and he sheds all of his armor. And I love the visuals of this because, again, we were talking about this kind of with in our discussion with Sinners earlier tonight about being able to tell some of the story without, exposition or explanation, like words or anything, but just presenting things visually and you piecing it together. Here, Percival, when he falls into the river, he sheds his armor, and when he sheds his armor, he has another vision of the Lord with the Grail, and this time he answers correctly because he shows up as a man, not as a knight, for King Arthur, and then he gets the Grail and helps rescue Arthur.
I think what would have been great is if the question he had asked is what's your favorite color.
That's what's funny though. While watching this, I'm like, wow, you see what, by watching this, you see what Monty Python was parodying, because the story's very similar but different through the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, but there's similar elements.
Yeah, like what he said, we've got to go on a quest to the Grail. I was like, oh no. I was thinking, if you just start like Monty Python and the Holy Grail at that point and just not finish the Excalibur story, would have been perfect. But no, it's funny, and I know you talked about Sinners. I'm talking about it on Wednesday, but these movies both have sort of a theme of baptism. In Sinners, it's at the end, that scene in the river, and then here you've got him literally shedding his armor as he's going, under the water and being sort of reborn as this new man. It's, I miss movies that have themes and broader ideas and stuff that's not just on the surface, and that's not a pun about water.
No.
Yeah.
And one of the other things that's really cool about this one is they also, in their production design, really worked and I think accomplished giving it a authentic medieval feel, because these guys are wearing plate armor. And if you play Dungeons and Dragons, or if you're or a historical person, and not play D&D, but whatever, plate mail is heavy and it's not the easiest thing to fight in. So these guys, these fights that they have, they're not all choreographed. Dun, 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 dun. They're fighting in heavy plate mail, and these guys are just getting knocked over and can't quite get up because they're in this heavy armor.
Oh yeah, that's some of the, like Braveheart is probably the gold standard for these kind of like down and dirty fights. But this one, you really feel, like you said, you get knocked over if you fall off your horse, or you just like have a wrong fall, you're down on the ground, and you better hope you can get up before 6 people charge you with, an axe or a sword. And I love that, particularly the part where Mordred is fighting in his like shining gold, weird demon kid armor. He's like slashing people just at the vulnerability parts where the sections link up, like getting into that moment of weakness, and then his blood is splurting out everywhere. It hurts, and it's really sad watching this, because you can just feel how kind of like cold and muddy and lonely it is out there on the battlefield.
Yeah, you can. I mean, these feel like, for all the fanciful and fantasy type stuff and magic stuff, these fights that they have feel like real, like authentic, like armor fights. These guys aren't just like John Wicking this shit. They're freaking, it's one of those things where they tried to go for that, and I think it really adds this like nice little element of this, grounding this story just a little bit, while you've got all this magic and stuff in here. You also have these kind of grounded elements to where, the castles they're taking, the sets are amazing in this film. They're on castles, and these guys are riding heavy. When they get knocked off, like you said, it's like a turtle on his back. When during the joust, it's not like, haha, they got hit with a joust. Oh, he pops up. All right, let's go to fight. It's like, they have trouble getting up out of their position, and the production design, I think, is just spot on in this film.
Oh yeah, I mean, even the opening scene, the kind of the prologue, I don't remember the name of the guy that Uther was fighting, but it's the one that they eventually have the truce, and then it goes south. But there's a siege battle of that guy's castle, and you see in the extreme foreground the flaming catapults, and then you've got the guy watching Uther's men down, from the vantage point up in the castle, and it's like this giant wall of flaming stuff comes at him, and he just kind of like ducks out of the way. It almost hits him. And then we forgot to talk about Merlin's staff. I'm sure it
Oh
was like
yeah.
rigged with like a flamethrower or something, but it would just like ignite. It looked like magic.
It did. It ignited, and he ignited just at the right time when he needed to get people's attention, which was always fun. And yeah, the Merlin character, like I said, this is the story you want when you're getting the Excalibur story. This is the story you want of Arthur, because with Merlin too, not only does he have his own agenda a bit, but I love how they explored the theme of Christianity taking place of the old ways, because he talks to Morgana about how the one God is replacing the many gods. And I'm like, I didn't expect this conversation to happen in this film, because we've seen that happen in a few other stories too. And I'm like, wow, they're even covering mythos and the death of mythology, basically, with the movement of Christianity. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and they've got like a lot of dialogue that kind of references this sort of struggle. There's one, where can I find it? Well, during the I think it's actually during the wedding of Arthur and Guinevere, they play Kyrie eleison, which is a religious
Yeah.
song, which was kind of unexpected. There's one. I love this. I can't remember who said it, but it was, "No knight who is false can win in combat with one who is true." It's a great line.
It is a great line.
But no, you just talk about all of this talk of virtue and heroism versus evil. I mean, the idea of temptation. I had read briefly on Wikipedia that this started as like an unofficial adaptation of Lord of the Rings, and you can see that influence all throughout this. I mean, you've got the temptation of Excalibur, which might as well just be the one ring, because
Yeah.
Utho. The movie opens on a darkened battlefield, and Uther's like, I want that, I want that sword. Yeah. It's like, Merlin's like, well, you gotta have it, but it's you're gonna be tested. And he is tempted, and he fails spectacularly, and leads to the ruin of several generations down the line, and darkness falls across the land. Even at the end, when Arthur gets his mojo back, but right before he drinks from the Grail, he's this withered, former great king who's been damaged by sin and evil and all this stuff, but he drinks it, and then he gets his health back. He's like, okay, now we're going to go to war. It is literally the return of the king.
It is. But the story of King Arthur has been around a very long time. So it's not saying that Tolkien wasn't influenced by this, because the whole story of King Arthur is one of those I guess modern mythologies. It's not like Norse gods, and this is a mythos for Britain.
Sure. What I'm saying is, and this is decades before Peter Jackson came out with his Lord of the Rings trilogy.
Oh, that way, yeah.
But it's, the stories line up so that if you're watching this, you're like, this feels like King Arthur, but it feels like it's got a flavor of that Lord of the Rings in there. And knowing that there was some kind of a crossover, at least conceptually, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm not saying that's a dig on a lack of originality or anything. It's just, it's neat if you've got that full context to go and watch this movie and be like, oh, that's a really cool blending of these ideas. I am glad that we watched Camelot first, because if I had watched this first and then watched Camelot, I'd have been like, oh, you just cut out the really good part of the story, and then you replace, Merlin's just going to show up for 10 minutes. He's like an owl man. No.
That's kind of why I wanted to go in order, because of the way these stories play out. And it'll be interesting, because when I pick the next King Arthur film, it's completely different than this one. I could have gone with First Night for the next film, for our last film, but that was way too similar to this, even though it's got Sean Connery and Richard Gere in it as Lancelot. I didn't really want to watch that one again.
Instead
But
of
the soundtrack to it is cool.
Instead of the giant dragon, it's a giant gerbil. Sorry.
See, we didn't have the internet. We still heard about the gerbil rumor, but I have no idea how that happened. Rumor. But yeah, the soundtrack for that is First Night is really good, and soundtrack for Excalibur is really good, including featuring that wonderful, wonderful track of O Fortuna, the Siege of Camelard, played by Carl. That was composed by Carl Orff. Orff, which was used in many fantasy films for some time, and you can tell why. That dun 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 dun.
I'm pretty sure they use that as the commercial for Medieval Times now too. I think
probably. But the music that was composed by Trevor Jones of all people actually fits this movie really good. You want that type of soundtrack in here, and they have that as well. But yeah, I mean, this film, I don't think I actually have seen this before till now, and I'm like, I was impressed. I was like, this is fun. This is actually this one's fun.
It is, and I think comparing this to like Camelot was really lacking in the magic, and I think that's a key component to this. But you had mentions of Merlin, but it's almost like they were trying to sidetrack him as if he was perhaps a figment of Arthur's mind or something, because he was always going off to visit him in the woods, and he saw him as an owl, and no one else really saw him transform into these creatures or anything, so far as I can remember. But here, because otherwise it's just this really dry period melodrama about this romantic triangle where no one has chemistry with each other. Whereas in this, you've got these incredibly bloody battles, and you've got the romance and the things that are other than romance, the intrigue, but you've got so much magic, and magic going on in the context of like a religious revolution for the time period. And yeah, you mentioned Sinners. This movie and that movie are great companion pieces because they both are very long, but they stuff a whole lot in terms of storytelling, movie making, and themes that you could spend the next year writing a paper about both of these things.
You could. And with Excalibur, I think it also helps, much like Sinners in parallel ways, the performance and the cast you have here. You have this they were young at the time, talented cast in this film, that really brought their all to this story. You could tell they're very committed to these roles, and I was very happy to see them lean more into the magic and more fanciful elements, because they're the elements that I remember from the Arthur stories, with Merlin and the magic and that, to where they play it up far more than they did in Camelot, which I agree. Camelot was missing that, because that is a big part that's always been the big part of the story. I mean, the whole idea of the Lady of the Lake throwing the sword.
I forgot about that because it wasn't even mentioned in Camelot, I don't think.
No, it wasn't really mentioned. No, it wasn't. And in here, she plays an integral part. I mean, she literally fixes the sword and gives it back and going, yeah, you get another chance, dude, because he confesses his sin. Yes, you can see that. I mean, really, you're right. You could definitely dig into the different themes and the different representations of the characters. Like I said, Percival being what Arthur should have been this whole time. Morgana, embodiment of revenge. You've got, Mordred, the incestuous child of Arthur and Morgana, but Mordred ends up being Arthur's penance for what went on, because if Arthur wasn't in a weakened state, he probably wouldn't have been taken by Morgana. But the fact that he was already in a weakened state because he gave up his sword. Yeah, he ends up, Mordred ends up being his downfall at the end, which is beautiful. Oh, man, it's so brutal, but so great. So, folks, we get this massive battle at the end to where Arthur's guys. He doesn't have many knights left because either left or have died because they went on the Grail. But he's like, fine, rally whoever's left. Let's go get Mordred. And Mordred's like, all right, let's do this. He figures he's got his gold armor that can't be, he can't be hurt. And so they start fighting, and Arthur's guys get this element of surprise, but then Mordred's guys are fighting back, and Arthur's guys getting their ass handed to him. And then all of a sudden, like you said, Lancelot gets that Han Solo moment. Ha! He comes in, he just starts wasting guys. But then Lancelot surprisingly gets killed.
Well, just briefly, what I loved about that scene is that it's a nighttime battle and there's like mist and everything everywhere, right? So when Lancelot shows up, we the audience knows that it's him, but Arthur's like, or someone's like, wait, is that Lancelot? And it's like, no. Wait, is that really Lancelot? And then Arthur's like, wait, I think that's fucking Lancelot. It's great because it's dark and you can't see, like it's just some dude showing up and like killing your enemies, and he's like this wild bearded man. It's not a Han Solo moment in that he's instantly recognizable to everybody. Like, okay, help is here. We know that it's our friend. It's a realistic portrayal of how that would happen. Like, it's going to take a game of telephone for people to figure out, like, oh, that's who that is.
Well, let's not forget where the smoke came from, because Merlin gets freed basically from his crystals. I forgot how he gets freed. But he gets freed eventually from his trap, and he inhabits people's memories, and he ends up getting into Morgana's head, and while she's sleeping, and he through her dream, he gets her to talk in her sleep, because he can't use the spell anymore that he gave her until she gives it back to him. He has her remember it and has her do the smoke which comes out of her mouth, which is a great scene. And then he removes the spell that she's been using this whole time to keep her young. So he removes that spell, and she turns really old hag, and no one recognizes her.
And it's great because, Mordred comes into the indoor, sleeping quarters ever, and sees this, like, it's like that scene in The Shining where Jack Nicholson goes into the bathroom, and like the old hag comes out of the tub. He strikes her down and then like strangles the crap out of her. And that's I can't get over the fact that all of this, just the entire movie has one inciting incident, like they talk about in screenwriting all the time. But it's that whole thing about Uther using Merlin's powers to seduce and deceive and get what he wants. But like, baby Morgana is in the crib, like right next, like a little anteroom right next door, and she sees what happens. I mean, she might be 2 or something, but it's like that stays with her. And I'm sure she grew up thinking, if that bastard hadn't done this, I might have had just like a happy princess life. My dad wasn't so bad. My mom loved me. But then this guy had to come and ruin everything. And I got this bastard half brother, and he's a horn dog, and he's hanging out with the guy that made all of this, that helped ruin my life. It's just, it's like the Real Housewives of Camelot or something. It's so messed up.
It is a messed up story, and but it's fascinating to watch it play out because it's well executed. I mean, John Borman, who directed this, and he actually had some input on the script. This is the guy who, what else has he directed? He was still working up through 2014, it looks like, but it's interesting because he had done a lot of. Oh, he helped produce Deliverance. Did he direct it as well? I forgot. I'm horrible at this. I'm sorry, folks. But he directs the hell out of this film. Oh, he did. So the director of this also directed, prepare yourself, Zardoz, Deliverance, and just before he did Excalibur, he did The Exorcist 2.
That's right. Yeah, The Heretic. Yeah.
And then after Excalibur, he'd do The Emerald Forest, which I remember that being talked about for some time during that time, and then yeah, he continued to work, but those were probably his biggest films that he
Yeah.
did between 1972 and 1981. Uh, this is kind of the culmination of that. Yeah, Emerald Forest that had Meg Foster in it. That's why I knew of it, because I was a big Meg Foster fan. Uh, but and Powers Booth was in that one. but
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, so the director's not a slouch, but he just directs the hell out of this thing.
Yeah. Sorry. I
No.
just noticed I was looking at the cast like earlier, and there are
Mhm.
like a handful of Bormans in here. I think
Mhm.
partially showing up in the cast. Katrine Borman played Igraine from the beginning, Arthur's
Mhm.
mother, I guess. But yeah, it just seemed like this weird like nepotism thing. I don't know what was going on on that set.
Yeah, that's okay. He directed his wife to have a love scene with a guy, and she's completely naked, but it's PG, so it's okay. It's for the family. Uh,
Does that explain us, Mark? Is that what the hell happened? I had
oh,
never
that
seen this
totally
movie until today, but I've seen movies
no,
like it, and wow.
no. The '80s totally explain our our panache for these types of films that were PG. But getting back to what I was trying before I drifted off like I do. Um, the the showdown between Arthur and Mordred is brutal because he's fighting Mordred, and Mordred's got a spear and he's got Excalibur, and Mordred just gets the jump. He just boom, he gets Arthur right in the it's like funk, and you're like, oh, that's it. No, Arthur fucking pulls himself on the spear, and Mordred's like, what the hell? And Mordred's got his armor that his mom Morgana had enchanted, saying it can't, as long as he wears this armor, no man-made weapon could harm him. Well, of course, Arthur's got Excalibur. So if you're paying attention, he pulls himself down the spike and stabs Mordred. And I'm just like, dude,
A-
wow.
And it's really messed up because that's father and son. They're both like, murdering each other. Like,
Yeah.
again, okay, you could write 2 papers on this.
And it is father and son. Yeah. But this film, yeah, is crazy. But it's good. This was better than I thought it was going to be. And for 81, this is just before Conan. Conan be 82, and that launched the whole sword and sandal thing. But man, looking this, I think this also had a little hand in our sword and sorcery type of films that we would get after this in the 80s.
Oh
You
yeah, I
know,
mean, you think about this and you think Krull, I think comes to
Mhm.
mind. That's like probably a spiritual successor to that because that had the it was more of a fantasy thing, but there's definitely
Right.
magic and stuff. It's like this
Mhm.
movie plus some monsters and the glaive.
Oh God, I love the glaive. Such a great weapon. But yeah, the other type of sword and sorcery films that we got along with our sword and sandal films, I think were influenced by this because those production designs as well, very much similar as far as kind of dirty, more gritty, not so shiny, darker sets, odd kind of surreal use of magic and such, and just yeah, I could see how this influenced other films after it as well. So yeah, Excalibur, folks. Your final thought with this one, Ian?
Where's the 4K? I want- and I would
Right?
say if you've never seen this movie before, you've gotten all the way through this conversation and you still want to see it, look out to see if your local, like if you have an art house theater, if they're showing it. Because yeah, like I mentioned, the Pickwick here in Park Ridge, Illinois, showed it on a random Wednesday. I think they do like a classic movie night or
Sure.
something each
Mhm.
week. And again, I'm kicking myself because I couldn't go see it. But yeah, definitely worth a rental. Definitely worth a blind buy, honestly, I think. But yeah, I'm waiting for that 4K because I think especially if they restore it, it looks so great with like the light glinting off the armor. We mentioned those kind of green reflections. The movie is so alive that I can only imagine what would happen if someone did like a full on like
Ooh.
high def restoration of it. I think it'd be really beautiful.
It would be, especially when you get into the crystal cave where there's all the
Mm.
colors, whereas above ground, you don't really have a lot of bright colors. You've got a lot muted colors, grays, and it's very hard. But when Merlin goes down into the cave of the dragon or whatever you want to call it, there's colored crystals and light and just it plays, it's very different than the real. They really wanted to give it that, yeah, this is not reality where Merlin and Morgana are.
Right, but even above ground when it's dingy and dark, as you mentioned, Merlin has that rockin' like
Skull
metal
cap,
skull
yeah.
cap thing that comes down to a point right here, and it's so shiny that it just like glows in the darkness. It's really neat.
Yeah, so I agree. You should watch this, folks. Especially if you're a sword and sorcery type fan and haven't seen this. Not only the talent, but just the story, the way it's directed, and everything. It really comes together to be far, and yet still has a bit of a modern taste and flair to it. Modern as in 80s taste and flair to it, even though it's medieval. It's just got kind of that spirit. You can tell just a hint of it and just enough to make it unique, and I'm glad we watched it. I really am very
Well,
excited. So
it's one of those movies where I think you could almost just re-release it now, not even having to remake it, because
Mm,
it's a period piece. And because they don't mess around with like special effects really to the point where it looks really dated, a lot of what they do is, with props or in camera stuff, it looks really good. I feel like people could just, come to appreciate this now.
yeah, there really isn't any like fancy animations or anything done in this whatsoever. They use super imposing images and other, like you said, practical camera tricks and effects more so
E-
than.
e- Even the scene towards the end, we kind of talked about where Morgana encounters Merlin in the dream, and she reaches out. They have the two shot, and she reaches out to touch his face. I gasped when her hand went through him because I didn't realize that was a
Yeah,
dream projection or a trick. I'm like, that was really well done.
yeah,
And there's that great bit where he kind of gets the eyes of the dragon, and you can tell they're contact lenses, but they're super creepy, like something out of the TV series V. um, and also, I think modern audiences would love to see, like we did, spot young Liam Neeson. Oh my God, Helen Mirren used to be insanely hot. Not that she's not, wonderful now, but you know what I'm talking about.
oh yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Also, the selling point of if you could somehow put this into the marketing, like, no, seriously, this is what PG movies were like back in the 80s.
There's that. Yeah, there's also that.
Mm.
So there you have it, folks. Excalibur, recommended by both. So glad I put this on the docket because, yeah, I hadn't really seen it before. I'd run across the soundtrack in many a thrift store, which I will now have to pick up when I run across it again. Because yeah, I need that. And yeah, once this gets the restoration, or even if it doesn't, definitely worth a rewatch. Not right away, but I definitely could see myself watching this again because this is a fun watch. This really is, and really well done film. So thank you, Ian, so much.
Yeah.
Joe is with us in spirit. He couldn't make it tonight, but now, as always, is the license to shill. So please, sir, shill away.
Well, my name is Ian Simmons. I run Kicking the Seat, which you can find at kickseat.com and also right here on YouTube. Do interviews and roundtables and movie reviews and all that stuff. And we'll have our own roundtable, not the Knights, but Earth's Mightiest Critics. We'll be talking about Sinners on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Central. So if you want to come hang out and be a part of that conversation, you can. It's my favorite film of the year so far. And yeah, that's about it. Check it out.
Awesome. Awesome. And yes, and check out specialmarkproductions.com for all your stuff that you don't catch here. And thank you, everyone. We went over 4,000 subscribers.
Yes.
We've already hit our goal that I had set for the year. And so now I got to look at a different goal. But yes, we are over 4,000 subscribers, and we are getting people who are commenting on videos and watching. And I appreciate all the support because all the noise that's out there, even giving our little sliver of the internet a little breath, of consideration. I appreciate very much. So thank you very much. We've got one more film, which will be another interesting, different telling of the Arthur story, King Arthur, from 2004, directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring Clive Owen, Keira Knightley, and Mads Mikkelsen. With Hugh Dancy as Galahad. So that's going to be another interesting tale. If I haven't seen it in ages since it probably first hit video, so should be fun revisit. So tune in for that. And if you missed it, next month is going to be Artificially Yours, where we're looking at films involving love interests who just happen to be artificial humans. So stay tuned for all that. Thank you so much. Like, subscribe, and all that here. And until next time, we'll just say good night, everyone.
Good night.